All right, guys, so you need to have your binder with loose leaf paper in it and a pencil handy. We're going to take standard notes. Many of you have asked about how to do the standard breakdown or how to unpack the standard. That was not a part of our class that we had gotten to yet, but this week I am introducing that because we will take standard notes and do a standard breakdown every time we begin a new lesson. So we're starting a new lesson this week, and before we can get started on that lesson, we need to understand the standard. So get your paper, get your pencil, and let's take notes. So the first thing that I want you to do is to get a clean sheet of paper. And you are going to write out the template for taking standard notes. It's quite a bit of writing, but once you do it this one time, you will not have to do it again. Every single time we take standard notes, you will use your template to help you set up your graphic organizer to take your notes. So this template is just a graphic organizer for taking notes. You will not take any notes on your template ever. The template is just your model. It's your picture. It's your graphic to go by so that you will know how to set up future notes. We will take notes today, but we will not do it in our standard notes template. So on your sheet of paper at the very top, go ahead and label it standard notes template. And then you are going to draw boxes that will should mirror the images that you see on the screen. So your first box is the standard. And yes, I do need you to write what's in white, what's in the white boxes. You can put that information in your own words, but that information is there so that you would know the purpose of every one of these boxes. We will always use every one of these boxes, and you need to know what the boxes mean. So in the standard box, you will simply copy down the standard that I'll always show you on the computer. So the standard as it is written without any word omissions or without adding anything to it. So word for word, just copy down the standard. And then when you get to the verbs box, in that box, you will write down all of the important verbs that we highlight in our standard. Not only will you copy those verbs down, but you will copy the definitions of those verbs. So the example is the verb analyze. We see analyze over and over in our standards, and analyze means to break down. So we will write that in our verb box. Your next box is the noun or content area words. So this box is going to be very specific to English. In this box, we will define a lot of words that are not necessarily English words, but we will define those words as they pertain to reading literature and informational text. The orange box says standard in my own words. So for this box, I always ask that students go ahead and reread all of your notes. So now you need to reread the standard. You need to reread the verbs and their definitions, along with the nouns and the content area words and their definitions. Now you need to think about it. Think about what all of those words mean together. What all of those words mean together, and ask yourself how do you understand it? So how do you comprehend what the standard is requiring of you? I often tell my students to think about if you had to go home and tell your mom or your parent very specifically what you did in class that day, what standard you were working on, how would you explain it to your parent or your guardian? Or if you had to teach the lesson to the class and you had to talk to your peers, how would you explain the standard to them? That thought that you come up with is the standard in your own words. Standard goals. So we'll break the standard down and set goals for each standard that is specific to what I want you to accomplish for that lesson. So, for example, a standard may have several different parts to it, but for that particular lesson, we may only focus on one thing. And you're going to see exactly what I mean with our standard for today. Standard connections. This is a reflection box. So now you should reflect on all of your notes, on everything that you read and everything that we have said in class, and think about how you could relate this standard to your own life or to the things around you. That may not seem clear right now, but once we do today's standard together, that purple box is going to make very good sense to you. And then lastly is the green box. How do I know I have reached mastery? So this is another box where you're going to have some time to think and reflect. So go back over your standard goals. Look at the connections that you've made and tell me what would be things that you would have to do or perform well on in class for me to know that you have mastered the standard that we are studying. So how do I know I have reached mastery? That box's contents will change based on the standard. So notice what I've highlighted here. You will not take notes on the template. This is to keep so you will always know how to make the graphic organizer. It's also to keep so that you will always know what each one of these boxes in the graphic organizer means. Feel free to pause this video or to go back as you need to so that you can copy all of your notes. But you do need all of the notes that I have on the left-hand side of my page on the sheet of notebook paper. Now, let's look at our standard for today. So notice the box in the top right-hand corner. It gives you some instructions. Rewrite the standard notes graphic organizer. Title the top of your paper RL.6.3 Characterization. I've given you an example on the left-hand side of the screen. Your new sheet of paper should look just like the left-hand side of the screen. You are titling these notes RL.6.3 Characterization. I left it off, but you should always write the date. So today's date is September 1. If you are writing your MLA date, you will write 1 September 2020. Now you see our standard, RL.6.3. So remember that I told you that standards can focus on a lot of different parts, but we have a focus. So we are titling these notes characterization because our focus this week is characterization. So in your gray standard box, I want you to copy the standard you see on the screen. Describe how particular stories or drama's plot unfolds in a series of episodes, as well as how characters respond or change as the plot moves towards a resolution. Let's copy the standard in the gray box. And yes, this is a standard from 6th grade. We're simply reviewing this standard in 7th grade so that you'll be better prepared to handle the 7th grade standard that is a step up from this 6th grade standard. So this week and next week are review weeks, and then the week following, we will begin with 7th grade standards. So again, we are copying the standard into the gray box that reads standard. Now this screen has your verbs and your nouns. Notice the key in the top right-hand corner. Verbs are highlighted in yellow and nouns are highlighted in blue. If you would like to do the same thing, you can highlight your nouns and your verbs in your standard box. Remember, part of your school supply list is to have 3 different colored highlighters. If you have those highlighters, you can choose 2 different colors. Your colors do not have to match mine, and you can go ahead and highlight your verbs and your nouns. Your verbs are describe, unfolds, respond, change, and moves. The important nouns are stories, dramas, plot, characters, and resolution. Now, there are more nouns in the standard, but the nouns that are important to you understanding the standard and what it requires of you are highlighted in blue. Let's highlight or underline our verbs and our nouns. If you want to go ahead and write your verbs and nouns in your verb and noun boxes, you can do that, but please leave room for definitions. Describe, to give details about something or someone. So like by now, you know Mrs. Foster's favorite question is why. So every time I ask you why, what I'm really asking you to do is to go into greater detail about what you are saying. We're going to define all of our verbs first. Unfolds means to develop. Information is told, revealed, or presented. So when you read a story and you first start reading a story, you do not know all of the information, you don't know all of the details. But as that story continues, it develops. So it develops because information is added. Respond, to react or say something. So when we're reading, we always want to pay attention to our characters' responses. How do they react to things? What do they say in response to things? Change. Change means to become different, to grow, to revert, to worsen. Those last synonyms are very important. When we talk about characters changing, oftentimes we think about fairy tales, how characters get better or how things turn out happily ever after. But we also have to remember that characters can change by getting worse or by reverting or going back to old behavior that may not be good behavior. So don't always think about change as in being positive change. We just want to track how characters change, whether it be positive or negative. Moves, continues on, progresses. So when we talk about the plot moving, we basically talk about the story continuing. So we are continuing to see the events unfold or develop. Now let's look at definitions for the nouns. Story. So you do not have to write story with the apostrophe S. You can simply write the base word, which is just story, right? So a story is simply an event or a series or a compilation of events or multiple events. Drama is simply a story that is told in the form of a play. Plot, the parts or events of a story. So all of the parts of a story come together to make up the plot. You cannot have a story without a plot. Characters, the people or animal that make up the action or events of a story. I included animals here because sometimes we read fiction that is fantasy and it includes all types of talking animals and objects and all of those things. So those things then become characters because they help make up the action or the events of a story. And then the resolution is how the conflicts of the story is solved, excuse my leaving that D off, or how the story comes to an end. So we need the or here because we know that sometimes stories are left open-ended. The conflict is never really solved. A lot of times when we watch movies where the problem, remember conflict is just problem, where the problem is never solved, we think there will be a sequel. But when we're reading, a lot of times authors do that intentionally so that the reader has an opportunity to think about what could happen or what would happen. Okay, so let's not always look for the problem to be solved and neatly tied in a bow. Sometimes the story just ends. Remember, pause and rewind as you need to. Now we are ready to put that to put that standard in our own words. So let's think about everything we've talked about. Let's think about all of our verbs. Let's think about our nouns. And I want you to ask yourself, what do the verbs mean? What do the nouns mean? If you had to explain this standard to your parent or to a friend, what would you say? Think about that for a moment. So we know that we're talking about describing things, how characters change. We're talking about the plot, developing, the story unfolding and developing. How would you put that all together to tell someone what we're going to study this week? This is going to require some think time for you. Once you come up with your standard in your own words, I need you to look back over your standard. Make sure that you haven't left out any important part of the standard. When you come to our live session, I would love for some volunteers to share their standard in their own words. Standard goals. For this particular standard, I've given you the goals that I want you to have because our focus is only characterization. We're not going to talk about plot and define the parts of a story. We're only going to talk about characterization. And if we talk about any parts of the plot, it will only be to help us understand the characters. So goal number 1, I can identify and analyze character change. Goal number 2, I can identify and analyze character responses. So I can identify how characters change, and I can identify how characters react to things that are happening. Number 3, I can provide textual evidence of how the characters change. So not only can I identify and explain and break down how characters change, I can also provide evidence to support what I think. So that's the third standard. Number 4, I can provide textual evidence of how the characters respond. So, for example, if you say a character responds angrily to other characters, then you need evidence to support that. So my expectation for you for this standard is that you will be able to accomplish those 4 goals by the time we are done with this standard. So you're going to copy your standard goals into your standard goals box. Now let's talk about making connections. This is a student box. So to make a connection, I want you to think about how you can apply this standard to your own life or to the world around you. And so here's a question you can ask yourself. Has there been a time when you changed because of events that happened? Think about how you react and how you respond. So remember, this standard talks about change. It talks about reactions and responses. So think about that and how you can connect your own life to this standard, to the topics of this standard. The final box. What does mastery look like? Read the goals for this standard. What must you do to show mastery? So you tell me. I've told you the goals and my expectation for you for this standard. Now you tell me, how will I know that you have mastered this standard? What are some things that you could perform well on to show your teacher that you understand RL 6.3 characterization? Your answer will go in the green box. Now, the rest of this lesson we will finish in our live class. I need for you to have taken all notes before you see me, and we will continue when we have class. I do want you to go ahead and set up a new sheet of paper. I know you're taking a lot of notes today. Take these notes before you see me so that we won't have to go over them in class. Now on your new sheet of paper, you are going to take focus notes. I've exampled on my sheet of paper how you should set up your sheet of paper for your focus notes. At the very top above the blue line, you want your name, your MLA dates, class period, and the assignment title is characterization notes. Remember to write an MLA date. You write the number first, the month, and then the year. Here is your essential question. What is characterization? You're going to take 2-column focus notes. The left side of the focus notes is for important terms and concepts. So in the tiny box at the top, write important terms/concepts. On the right hand side, I want you to write definitions/examples. As you watch the video, pause to write down important terms and concepts. And then on the right hand side, you will write down definitions of those important terms and record examples. When you are finished taking notes, your focus notes should clearly say what indirect characterization is, what direct characterization is, and what the acronym STEAL means. STEAL. And my little burst says tells versus shows. You should also know which type of characterization, tells, and which type of characterization shows. Have your notes completed for our live session.